This week, we have two particularly important dates to watch, both of these dates having to do with our two biggest stories of 2020. And these are the stories that you asked the most about. So as usual, you were excellent producers. Thank you very much. I'm going to use your questions as a guide to get us ready for the week. So we should know about Tuesday and Thursday. Both of these dates have to do with either politics or the pandemic. So Tuesday is a day that matters because it's 6 days before the Electoral College votes. If states have settled disputes and certified their results, then they have reached safe harbor. Safe harbor is nothing that we've ever talked about before. Don't worry, we didn't know anything about it either until this year. But basically, it gives states a certain level of legal protection where their results are considered conclusive. We'll get to more of that in a second. In the meantime, on Thursday is a meeting for the FDA advisory panel looking at the Pfizer vaccine and whether or not it should receive emergency use authorization for use to treat COVID-19. Now, if the advisory panel does believe that this vaccine should receive emergency use authorization, we could see approval within a matter of a few days, even a week. And the reason why that matters is that there are some models to suggest that if a vaccine is rolled out in the next few weeks, it could actually save lives. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's get to your questions. We're going to start with politics because many of you had questions about election fraud. I know you're still seeing a lot about it. So generally, let's just take a step back. One thing to know about legal cases, and again, I needed to review this too because my point of reference for legal cases tends to be Law and Order, which is fine. It's a great show, but we need to have a little deeper understanding of what happens with the legal process. So let's say that I accused you of fraud and I signed an affidavit signed under oath, under penalty of perjury, that I believed that you were committing fraud. And my lawyer, my legal team brought this case before a judge, and the judge looks at it and goes, wow, this is really serious. This is a really serious allegation. Do you have any other proof? You have financial records, you have emails, you got anything? I got pictures, video, anything like that? And if we say no, the judge could say, well, I'm going to need a little bit more than this. And the judge can send us back. They can dismiss the case. The judge can dismiss the case, or they could say, you have to gather some more evidence in order for this case to proceed, because we have a certain legal burden as the accusers to present a case that the judge believes has enough evidence to go forward. So what's happened in general, because there's more than 50 legal challenges that are from the Trump campaign and others regarding the election in 2020. In general, judges have dismissed cases brought about election fraud or asked for more information. And that's why at this point, it doesn't look like the legal challenges will change the results of 2020. So here's a couple questions. Primer, you asked, where do we stand on states certifying the voting numbers? Right now, most states have certified their results, which I think is what you're asking about, including all the major battleground states, which are very key to deciding who actually wins the 2020 elections. When states certify their results, then they know which electors are going to vote. And the electors are the ones that actually elect a U.S. president. Hey there, Lori Young asked, is there evidence of voter fraud that can make any difference in the presidential election? It's a great question. Allegations of fraud are going to continue. The cases themselves right now have not reached the level of seriousness that would lead to a legal challenge that would change the election results. What's really important to know when it comes to the facts about this is that several legal challenges in several big states would have to overturn results to lead to a different conclusion in 2020. The Joyful Adventure asks, when will it be going to the Supreme Court? None at this point does it look like the cases are going to be evolving to reach that level yet, but it's something that we'll continue to watch. Interesting editorial in the Wall Street Journal, just to be aware of. The editorial board in the Wall Street Journal tends to lean conservative, so keep that in mind. But one of the things that they detailed are a few cases where Democrats have lost elections for Congress in the 2020 election period. And Democrats are using legal challenges in Iowa and New York to try to overturn the results, overturn results of elections won by Republicans. This does not reach anything close to the level of the presidency, but because most of the coverage only focuses on Republican challenges to the 2020 election, I thought it was important to know about. And so I'm going to post that on the website because both sides are using legal challenges in one way or the other in the 2020 election. So let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. We talk a lot about case numbers, but what you should know about COVID-19 right now in America is that it's the hospitalizations that are really raising eyebrows. So hospitalization in America is setting records of more than 100,000 people in the hospital. And the last record that we set was half that amount. So this is significant. Remember, we're watching hospitalizations because it's a level of seriousness with COVID-19 that makes us sit up and pay attention. Because if I know there's a positive case, but that person is asymptomatic and may or may not be contagious, that doesn't necessarily have the same consequence as someone that's in the hospital. We're more than 10 days out of Thanksgiving. So we're nearing that zone where the Thanksgiving and travel from that particular period during the holiday is when health officials start to expect seeing not only case numbers, but the more serious cases that could lead to hospitalization and death. Right now, America is right around 282,000 who have died from COVID-19. And remember, back in the spring, there was all this talk about models, right? What did the models show? Some models were showing more than 2 million people would die of COVID-19 with no mitigation efforts. With mitigation efforts, those estimates were around 240,000 for this year going into the fall. The timeline was constantly moving. So it's important to know that we're over the estimate for that model. And I'll get to that model in just a moment. You might be hearing that a person dies of COVID-19 every minute in America. Just for a little context, I was curious about the leading causes of death. The leading cause of death in America is heart disease. And a person dies of every 36 seconds of heart disease, or roughly 655,000 Americans every single year. This is according to the CDC. Now we're seeing certain states like Illinois, the governor came out and said, well, COVID is now our third leading cause of death in our state. So we're starting to see COVID creep up as one of the top causes of death in America in certain areas. And we'll see nationally, of course, how that works out. The same models that were being used in the spring are now making predictions again. And they're suggesting a 500,000, so more than 500,000 Americans would die by April 1st if everything stays the same with some of our mitigation efforts in place. What they're saying as well, though, is that with a vaccine rollout, that number could come down by a few tens of thousands of people. So significant enough to make a difference according to the model. And the models, remember, who would be the first one in line to get the vaccine? It would be those working or living in nursing homes. Those living and working in nursing homes make up more than 100,000 deaths of the total deaths. So about 1 in 3 deaths in America from COVID-19 are in nursing homes, assisted living facilities. And this is one of the reasons why the vaccine distribution would look there first, although we don't know all the details of that plan yet. Carly, you asked, give us the pros and cons of the mRNA vaccine. This is the type of vaccine technology that Pfizer used to develop their vaccine. We'll get into the particulars once we see if the emergency use authorization actually goes through. But remember, if it does receive authorization and you do see a headline about that, it is the first ever vaccine of its kind using that technology ever approved for human use. The pros are this sort of vaccine development can happen very, very fast. The cons, of course, is that we don't have long-term research on the effect of a vaccine developed in this way. I am Chef Shelley asked about COVID updates from other countries. And Sarah, you asked about whether or not lockdowns work because we're seeing more of that in different states like California, for example. Here's something interesting. European nations went into different lockdowns in the last couple of weeks. I say different because, we're lumping a bunch of countries together, and that's not always the most effective. But when you look at regions overall, after Europe put in more restrictions over the last several weeks, that looked a little different than the spring. So, shutting down restaurants earlier or completely, but keeping kids in school, some restrictions on families. What they saw is that the line for COVID cases in Europe has declined while the line in North America continues to go up. So there's some evidence that some of the restrictions in Europe in this new way are working. But again, you have some countries that are under strict lockdown, like Ireland, for example, very strict lockdown versus other countries that are allowing more movement, more discretion by their citizens. So that's something to keep in mind. Finally, just to end today is the anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And you might remember the speech by FDR where he talks about the day that will live in infamy. Remember, he made that speech the day after the attack. There are only 2 survivors from the Pearl Harbor attack 79 years ago. I found an interview with one of them where you could hear his voice telling the story. So I'm going to post that on our website. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful. quick questions, comments, let me know. And as always, more on smarternews.com. Have a great week.